Hey everybody, welcome to Nomads Nation Podcast, episode 13. I'm coming at you live from Vietnam, and my guest is also live in Vietnam. Luke Reynolds is the founder of BagMe, which, full disclosure, they do the development and production and kind of everything on the ground here in Vietnam for the Fyro production and the bags that we're making out here. So we wanted to kind of talk to Luke about like some more technical, insider, behind the scenes stuff when it comes to actually manufacturing and producing backpacks here on the ground. So Luke, thanks for jumping on, and how are you doing today?
I'm awesome, dude. Finally here with you doing a podcast.
Hell yeah, it's a little weird. We wanted to do it like in person together because you're like 300 meters away from me, but I'm like tech dumb and I didn't know how to set it up and everything like with the software, so we just had to do it this way, but it's fine. Next time we'll do it in person. I can look right in those baby blue eyes of yours.
Are they blue? I think they might be green, dude. You haven't been looking close
enough.
Yeah.
I guess not. No, I got to work on my observations. So what's cool about this episode, Luke, is so I was like, all right, I want to get you on, but so I had some questions that I was going to ask you, and I was like, I'm going to ask the community and see if they had any questions. So I put up a post on YouTube, like a little community post, and I put up a post on Reddit just asking for some feedback and some questions, and I didn't know what kind of response we were going to get. We got 30, 40, 50 questions, like really good ones. So I'm excited to like throw in some of the questions from the community and kind of hear what you got to say about all of it. So let's just kind of jump in. You ready?
Great. Ready when you are.
The first question, Luke, which is the most important question of all, is who is your favorite Beatle and why?
Oh, damn, dude. Yeah.
For a little context for anyone listening. Luke,
go for it.
Yeah. Just some context to the listeners. Luke and I, we connect not just on bags, but also music as well. We constantly talk about the Beatles. And I figured, we could open the conversation up by, talking about some music. So favorite Beatle and why? Go.
Yeah, there is no favorite Beatle. Yeah.
I got a favorite.
Like in the end, John Lennon has been a big inspiration to my life and my way of thinking. But, dude, it's the Beatles. It's the Beatles. There is no favorite.
It's the Beatles.
Yeah.
God, that's a great answer, okay? But you also said John Lennon, so I'll take that. And I'm also a John fan. I've had an interesting relationship with the Beatles over the years. My dad was the biggest Beatles fan ever, so we didn't have a choice but to be the biggest Beatles fans as well. So I started off on Team George, and then I was on Team Paul for 10 years. But over the years, it's been John for me. I just find myself going back to John songs the most. So right now it's Team John, but I think that the last one will be Ringo. So maybe as I get into the next chapter of my life, I'll just be listening to Octopus's Garden on repeat.
Yeah, take any one of them out. You haven't got the Beatles anymore. So.
All right, fine. Yeah. I guess that's a good answer. All right, moving on from the Beatles then.
Cool.
Let's talk bags. So some of the questions that we got were people just kind of want to know your backgrounds. How'd you get involved in being a bag developer?
Wow. So it's kind of a long story. Let's try and make it short. Actually, I started my career in motor racing. I left school early and went into a pretty prominent racing team in Australia in the touring cars and NASCARs back then. But anyway, some years in the industry, I decided I wanted out, and the idea was go traveling, keep jumping out of planes, skydiving until we become skydiving instructors. But somehow I followed a girl to Canada, ended up there. Came back to Australia, and basically I just wanted to take a break. I wanted to get a job where no stress, just have a think about life for a year. And I thought, let's try and work in an outdoor store, like selling outdoor travel gear, hiking gear and stuff. So I ended up getting a job in an outdoor store for mountain designs. And after about a year there, I was about to leave, and one of the owners, Kim Carrigan, who was one of the great climbers in the world through the 80s, called me up and he's like, we want you to come to head office. And basically I went up to Brisbane, became an inventory manager there. At that time we were producing, this is the late 90s, we're producing in Australia. So, working on all the inventory and buying, I had direct connection with the factory there, learned quite a lot. Anyway, years doing that, then I actually went over to Germany, got a job with Crumpler, back in the day when Crumpler started their big rise to glory. And I was opening up shops in Europe for Crumpler, all around Europe actually. And then around 2008, I decided to leave Crumpler. At that time, they offered me a job to come to Vietnam and sort of manage the whole factory and the new design team there and everything, and I said no. Went back to Australia at Mountain Designs, the company I was working for before. They were in a pretty tough position at that time. And I was walking into MD stores and people were like, oh, you're back in Australia, great. And they're like, we need a new product developer. You should come and work for the company. And at that time, you know, I've been involved with product development before, but never really like managed, like product manager, you know, being responsible for everything. So, but anyway, long story short, took the job, and that's how I got into, like directly into product development as a product manager. And then from there, ended up in Germany again, working for Saliwa. So in the end, I built their, I think it was summer 2015, Saliwa had a whole new rebranding. You know, 80, 90-year-old brand had a new rebranding. They were also in trouble with their backpacks when I got there, and I had to basically develop the whole new logo collection for summer 15, which a lot of that remains, those products are now superseded, but the foundation of what we created there is sort of the foundation of the design language there at Saliwa these days. So yeah, and then I think it was 2016, 17, I decided to start BagMe.
So what was the transition then that brought you from Saliwa to starting your own development company in Vietnam?
The transition there, that was basically my last jobs, the last companies I work with, my job was to fix a broken situation at those companies, really. Now, Crumpler was, we were growing, you know, but especially Mountain Designs when I got there, and Saliwa's backpack situation, they were broken. Put in a lot of work there, and in the end, I just decided, you know, I wanted to be able to help startups, you know, small companies who really needed help, get access to the same factories and supply chain and everything that all the big brands had access to. And at that time, I really saw an opportunity in the market for this because, you know, I was talking to some of the managers of some of the biggest factories here in the industry at that time and saying, I think outdoor is at its peak, you know, and they've just experienced years of growth in outdoor, totally confident. You know, I don't necessarily think they believed me at the time, but, you know, I saw a big change, you know, coming because for many reasons. So I wanted to be a part of that change, basically. And my thinking was, if I work with a lot of new brands, startups, small companies, and companies who really needed help to get themselves under control, it'd just be a lot more fun. And in the future, I think I was going to be on the right end of the market. And so far, I think that's tracking pretty well.
I think it's interesting, too, you're talking about sort of the downfall, or like, you know, the outdoors stuff sort of peaked, right? And my interpretation of that would be, it's not that people are hiking less or doing outdoors things less. My interpretation would be that back in the day, if you wanted a backpack to travel with, you'd probably get an Osprey or something that's more outdoorsy. But with the emergence of all these urban brands and these work brands and all these travel brands, now they're eating into the market share of these outdoor brands. Is that sort of the analysis?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think 15 years ago, 10 years ago even, you know, if people went to the office, they'd often carry a outdoor bag. And
for sure,
now they're more likely to carry something that's designed, you know, for that purpose. You know, something like a Peak
100%.
Designs, Alpaca, or, you know, one of these new brands.
So one of the other questions that we got as sort of like a follow-up to that is if somebody wanted to like get into development, product management, what's like a path that they should take to, you know, try and get their foot in the door?
Okay, so first there's a big difference between product development and design, right? So obviously there's a very gray area where those two meet. Some designers are product developers. I never consider myself a designer, but I've designed lots of bags, and a lot of designers argue the idea when I say I'm not a designer. Getting into it, it's an interesting question because there's no real school for backpack development. Most backpack developers come from within the industry. They come from industrial design, these kind of areas, and they somehow find their way in the system, and then the people who are generally good at that type of thing end up progressing in that direction. And I guess the same can happen with me.
Get their foot in the door and then work their way up. So it seems like then design, like learning how to be a designer or becoming an industrial designer, could be a good first step to kind of get your foot in the door and see if you can elevate your career from there.
Yeah, for me, my foot in the door was going and working in an outdoor store, right? I almost left before they dragged me into the head office. And that was really more outdoor focused, and I had a very strong interest in that at that time. So, yeah, the fact that there's no sort of school for it, there's no foot in the door in that direction, you have to find a different way in. And if that means you're in sales or something, and you're a great salesperson, but you see the product and you understand what the market wants, and you understand some technical things about the product, and then you connect with the design or development team, and you show that you've got some knowledge or something to add to that, there's a chance that you might be able to sort of break in the door that way. But I think you've just got to get yourself in there if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the lack of college courses for this provide kind of an opportunity in some ways because, if you get your foot in the door and you got the ambition and drive and you want to work your way up, it seems like the opportunities are probably there. So I think that's actually pretty interesting. Pivoting a little bit then, so, with you being in the industry so long, one of the community members on Reddit wanted to know, do you see a lot of like fake and replica bags? Like, let's just talk about that in general, because I'm curious. Because, like, in the community, we're seeing, like, there's, like, Air knockoffs popping up on AliExpress and Peak Design ones on Amazon and all these different things. Like, what's replicas like in the industry? Is it, like, this dirty little secret that a lot of brands are doing? Or is it different country to country?
Yeah, it's different country to country. I don't know, what's a fake bag, right? Like, I'm an Australian guy, a company in Germany employs me, I take their bags, I go and improve them in another factory, nobody who was there before me touched those products, right? So just that I'm employed by Saliwa makes it an original, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to make there is actually around here in Saigon, there's actually quite a lot of good knockoffs, if you want to call them that. And I've even been walking around the markets here looking at some knockoffs with some people who work for some factories and big companies, and we found some pretty good ones. And here in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, locals call it Saigon most of the time when they're speaking Vietnamese, the situation is very different to what it is in China. So one of the things in China right now is like every day I'm getting contacted by Chinese factories, we want to work with us. And as the business sort of disappeared from their factories, they had to find ways to make money too, right? So I'd go to trade shows even and see factories sort of showing their collections, and I'd look on their wall and I'm like, I know the designer who did that bag. I know whose bag that is. You know what I mean? So they've just changed the materials, and made a catalog and said, hey, we can do these bags for you. So it's different in China. Here, there's other things go on. You can have people who've worked for factories before, working with brands, and they've snuck out with patents, they've snuck out with materials. Or there's even situations where bags are being subcontracted into other factories, and they'll just make some extra and sell them out into the local markets. They might take some shortcuts sometimes, like not put bar tacks and reinforcement stitching and things like that in. But sometimes they do, and sometimes they're pretty good. So have I dealt with that? Only by seeing my products ripped off. But I'm not concerned about that, like people who want the genuine thing are going to go and buy the genuine thing, right? It's a bit of an honor sometimes seeing your product ripped off somewhere.
I agree.
Especially by bigger brands.
It's a good sign.
Especially by other brands, when you see things that you're like, oh, I'm sure I did that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, for sure. It is kind of like a backhanded compliment in some ways. Like we're ripping you off, but it's because it's because you made a successful product. So, but it's interesting, Luke, because you're talking about like Vietnam and China, and there's different bags made in different parts of the world, and this is some questions we're asking about like different like geographical questions like. There's bags made in China and Mexico and the Philippines and India, but why did you end up going to Vietnam? What is it about Vietnam and the bag industry that's just working so well right now?
Well, the industry for quality bag manufacturing has sort of, really established itself and created a foothold here in Saigon. So the supply lines are very short. You've been here in our office working, back here on this table where we've had questions, we call up a supplier and they come in the door, pretty quickly, yeah. So there's that. It's also just the mentality, I think, of doing business here with the people who have had companies. So in my experience, I've worked with some great Chinese factories in the past, yeah. But it's I guess the Koreans, for example, so back in the, I think 80s, 90s especially, the Koreans were offered incentives to come and set up businesses here, so to bring in management skills. And so a lot of the oldest factories here for backpacks were established by Koreans.
Now, is that I'm curious, Luke, because the factory we work with for Firo, Korean-owned, Richard is from Seoul, but is that just for a backpacks industry, or do you find that like with other industries in
No, there's
Vietnam
a lot of industries
owned by Koreans
here
as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
a lot of industries here. So it brought in a lot of managerial skills and got a lot of people working here. Yeah, but basically it just so happened that the backpack industry sort of really solidified itself here, especially with big players like Pungkook moving in here so many years ago.
And Pungkook is it's a Korean factory brand, right?
Yeah, well, they have many factories also in Indonesia now, other places. But I think in the outdoor industry, they'd be the largest producer in the game.
Can you name drop some brands they might work with?
Everybody from North Face to Osprey to Lululemon to, I'm pretty sure, I don't know about now, but definitely Samsonite. Eagle Creek, so North Face, Eagle Creek was VF brands, but Eagle Creek's now sold off, but it's still there, I believe. Mammoth, Nike, Adidas, and then they have factories that do things like Coach and stuff like this as well. And Richard used to be a manager at Pungkook as well.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And then the next biggest factory would be Kanan behind them, which is another fantastic factory. Yeah.
Yeah, you always spoke so highly about them, like just those state-of-the-art materials and production and everything. So you mentioned though, you're talking about, all right, so what makes Vietnam, the backpack capital of the world? We've got the managerial side from the Korean influence. We've got the proximity to suppliers and all these different fabrics and materials. What about like the quality of the actual workmanship though? The people who work in the factories, the sewers.
Yeah, I think when you communicate well with the Vietnamese people, they're great workers, really. Like, that's why the quality bags are made here. That's why even if you do go to China and get it cheaper, that a lot of brands are choosing to be here. It's great working with the Vietnamese people. It's a really nice thing, And now a lot of those Vietnamese people who over the last years have been working in these factories, they've started to gain skills and learn a lot of things about running the show, right? And now there's more factories being managed by and opened by Vietnamese people, which we also work with, And my team, they're all highly experienced too, and they're coming out of the factories and coming to work with people like me now. So Yeah.
On that note, we're going to jump around on some of these questions then, because this is a little bit later, but we're talking about Vietnam, and we had a couple questions in terms of like factory conditions and, you know, what is that actually like behind the scenes? You know, I've seen, you've taken me to a few factories in Vietnam, but it was always very clear for me that I wanted to work with, you know, factories that really took care of their employees. So I've always been impressed from what I've seen with the factories that I've been working with. But, you know, what's it like in reality in other factories in Vietnam? Just, I don't know, just factory conditions in general in this industry.
So generally, the factories that are here all have to meet sort of certain CSR guidelines from the government and from the brands who work with them. Yeah, so, but let's be real, sitting on a sewing machine day by day is tough work. Like, it's tough work, you know. And there's a certain type of person who does like to sit down and do this sort of repetitive work. Yeah, and there's some people who is just going to drive them crazy, like it would drive you and me crazy, right? It's the same in the office. Yeah, I have staff who love being out there at all the different factories, and yeah, and some people, they kind of want to be at their desk and have their spot and get their work done, you know. So generally, I think the conditions are pretty good here. It's when you get into some of there is some smaller Vietnamese-owned, like locally owned factories, you know, backstreet factories who, you know, sometimes might even do some subcontracting for some other factories. A little bit more challenging if you see it. I don't work with these factories. I know some. That's why if there's any subcontracting, which basically means that, you know, if there's pressure on time or something, or all of the orders come in at one time during the year, you know, some factories will send out parts of the backpack to be made at certain subcontractors. Yeah. Now, some of these are great, fantastic. Yeah. And some factories might choose subcontractors that are not that good. So we always, any products that come through BagMe, we have very strict agreement. Well, everybody just knows us, right? They know, we see what's happening all the time. We know how this game works deeply. So they're not subcontracting, and if there's any need to, the discussion is open. We can go there and we can speak to our customers about that as well and just say, hey, look, you know, we've got to meet these deadlines. This is how it's working. Yeah, but the main factories, it's as good as any factory that you would see, I guess, in Australia back in the day or something. You know, there's a lot more people there. Of course, there's pressure to get things done. It's not easy work being a sewer. But I also, like, you've been to Kim Ta Bags as well, right? Where I also filmed our first YouTube video. They're workers, so I've been working with them since, like, they have 150 people now, so a very small factory. But I've been working with them since they were like 20 people or something, and the boss was making patterns there. And they have like 15 or something of the original sewers there. And when I go there, it's all smiles, they're happy, you know. They enjoy their work. We have a joke. It's great. So, yeah. Yeah,
the subcontracting thing is quite interesting, because I remember reading an article one time where it's like this ethical business didn't realize that their factory was actually contracting things out to an unethical factory, and there was some drama with that. So even as a brand, you might not be aware of what's happening sort of behind the scenes, especially when there's that pressure, there's those deadlines, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing, you know, like it's sustainability, and, you know, running an ethical company can always be a little bit more challenging than it might seem on the surface.
Yes, yeah. You need to know your partners here. You need to know your partners. And I think you need to know how your product's being produced. So, you know, that's why some people come to us, because they know we have a very deep inside connections in the industry, and that when we go to a factory, that they know us, you know, they know we're very detailed, and they know what the expectations are. There's no way they're not even going to try and slip something through there, you know. And if we were working with people, if a brand asked me to support them and I thought they were working with somebody who might slip something through the system, I'd let them know. I'd like, maybe you need to have a different relationship, But generally speaking, the factories we work with here are great. Like, they're the best in the game. Like, really, like period. They really are. That's why they're working with the brands that I mentioned before.
For sure.
Yeah, and people like the boss of Kimta, he worked at PK as well. My team have all worked at the biggest factories as well, and yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I've always been impressed when I've always been impressed when I've gone to these factories. The conditions have been great. Like I said, everyone's always smiling and having a good time. I totally respect that it's not easy work sometimes. Yeah, no, for sure. They're the Vietnamese are the best, man. But like on that note, also like when it comes to like production, so another question that we got is, how long does it take to develop a bag? I know it's kind of an open-ended question, but I'm curious to see where you take it.
Yeah, there's so many things that can change that, right? So realistically, on average, it can easily take a year. Yeah.
And that's from what? From the design brief to the golden sample?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Now, back in the Saliwa day, I nearly killed myself doing it, but basically we had, the team had created nothing from November, and I had to come into Vietnam, basically stay here the whole time, and deliver sale samples. Start producing them in May, I think it was 7 months. A whole new collection for the brand. Now, people back then saw that at the factories and were like, okay, we hadn't seen something like that before. That was huge, But that's an exception to the rule. Like, I had to tell everybody else inside the company, like, go away, leave me alone. No room for discussion, no room for, it has to be done. So, and that was a tough gig. If I'm creating a bag for myself and I know what I want, and it's one product, I can get it done very quickly. Yeah, but we also have customers who might have a similar kind of product. I could have something almost ready for production in months. Don't get any ideas, potential customers. But normally what will happen is that we'll deliver samples. If customers are really excited about those samples, it just raises the expectations, and they're like, "Oh, can we try this? Can we do this? Want to do this?" And then it just becomes sort of multiple rounds of sampling. There could be, for technical product, there could be long periods of testing in between samples. So, and then when you have seasonal product, like I've done a lot of product for all sorts of people, Everest guides, people, explorers who have carted stuff across the ice and the north and climbed mountains that had never been almost seen in Antarctica, or National Geographic photographer, and for some really prominent skiers like Glenn Plake, who was a bit of a ski hero of mine when I was young, and then I ended up working with him, at his house also in Chamonix, building backpacks. But for winter backpacks like that, they need some testing. You have to find out where they're going to break, where they're working, where they're not, And so if that has to be ready for a winter launch, you need testing time. So you need to test it in a winter. So you're going to test it in the winter before, right? So that ends up lengthening the development time massively. But for the bags you talk about, I think on average 12 months is a fair, quick answer.
Yeah. Like you said, though, the challenge in that is actually, because you're on the technical side, you're on the ground, you're experienced doing this, and you work with a lot of startups. So sometimes startups, we're not quite as sure the direction we want to go, and we get excited about new ideas, and something's flashy over there, and I might get distracted. So I can see from your perspective how that can cause complications as to where, you know how to get the bag done fast, but then if you're constantly trying new things out, or let's get this feature in there as well, then that can lengthen the process a little bit.
Yeah, it can.
Guilty of that myself once or twice, but I'm learning the process. It's funny. Like
the
just,
next one will do a lot quicker. the next one.
Exactly. I mean, the last one was a really big learning lesson for me, and we pulled something amazing out in the end. But it just was just quite a process for me learning. Oh my God, yeah. The less clear of a vision that I have of what I want, the longer this whole process is going to take. So I could imagine, like for you, like when you got somebody coming in and saying, "Hey, this is exactly what I want," and that just must be like a breath of fresh air for you. It's really like, yes, we can do this.
Yeah. Well, if for example, I connect with a new client and they have the budget to get a really good designer involved as well, then and they trust us on the process, we can really strongly brief that product from the very beginning, and make sure that the things that that product have to do are non-negotiable. Form follows function. I thought that was supposed to be sort of the motto of design, right? But it doesn't always happen like that, And so when we really strongly brief a project from the beginning, then we can make sure that, we get a good start. Might take a little bit longer in the beginning, but then, by the first, second samples are just amazing, We've had customers who have had orders off first samples. Again, that's not the majority, but can do if that customer is clear what they want. We get through the brief very strong. We don't waste time doing, things that shouldn't be done, I guess, in the beginning. Yeah. But, you've got to begin with the end in mind. I think that's
for sure.
Stephen Covey, right? He said that in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm learning that with Firo, so I appreciate you taking me along this journey. It's been educational, to say the least, and we're getting there. But you did mention something about like form, how it follows function, and there's a big topic right now within my community in regards to something that's like, is it form, is it function? And I want to pivot into that, and that's PU coated zippers, Luke. Let's talk about these zippers, because the trend that I'm seeing in my community, in Nomads Nation, and just like in the carry community in general, is that people want more and more waterproofness. I get asked this question probably 10 times a week. What's the best waterproof bag? And I was just say, I've never seen a waterproof bag before. Maybe a scuba diving bag, right? So I'm trying to emphasize that these bags are weather resistant, water resistant at best, right? But just honing into PU coated zippers, because we're seeing a split in the community now. Like 3 years ago, everyone's like, everything's got to be PU coated, and then they bought these bags, and then some of these PU coated zippers ended up peeling, but some don't. But maybe they block the water better, but maybe they don't. Like, talk to me about PU coated zippers. Let's start here. How effective are PU coated zippers in keeping a bag waterproof?
Okay, they're not waterproof. YKK don't sell them as a waterproof option, right? So, little shout out to Subtech Sports in Sweden, I believe. You want a waterproof bag, you go there, yeah? YKK do make waterproof zippers, but the raw material is like, I think, like $50 a meter or something like this. It's crazy, yeah? But they actually, and then you ultrasonic, high frequency weld these things, and the bag's submersible, yeah? Actually, I have a couple of pieces of PU coated zipper right here, yeah? PU coated zippers do serve a purpose and do help shed water, yeah. But as soon as you start putting stitches in there, yeah, the water will get through those stitch lines, right? So as soon as the water breaks, the surface tension breaks and sort of gets into that thread, then it just wicks into the bag. It's not the weakness of the PU coated zipper. Also, too, there's a gap here that also, yeah. So for the right application, yeah, they're fantastic. They work really well. They help get rid of a bit of water. Great. The life of them, for most people, they're going to last a long time. But for really top-end users who are treating their stuff like crap, right? Like the stuff is being used like the bags are tools, yeah? And they're getting wet, then they're being stored wet, and they're heaving on these zippers, all the time. They're going to have a life to them. like any PU coating on any material, it'll come loose sometimes. But for most people, it's not a problem, really.
Yeah,
I use them a lot.
I'm curious too. Does that come out of like different suppliers, or I mean, most of these bag companies are using YKK. Is it usually AquaGuards that you're seeing, or is there a different YKK zipper that is usually being applied to these bags?
So AquaGuard. Okay, so YKK AquaGuard. AquaGuard is the same kind of coating. The difference is AquaGuard is the brand name for the zippers they use for apparel. Okay, so
Okay.
I believe they only make them in a number 3 and 5. Yeah,
Got
and that's
it.
because the coil on the zipper is what's called a standard coil. So basically, you have the nylon coil like this, yeah, and the yarn that holds the coil down onto the webbing here, or the tape, is on top of the coil, yeah, and that can basically get knocked off if it's being used on a backpack, yeah. So AquaGuard is kind of the same thing. The difference with zippers that we use on backpacks is we use what's called a racket coil zipper coil, and the difference is the coil is kind of like maybe shaped like a bit like this, yeah, where it's got a high point and the yarn sits down below that high point. I don't know if you can see what I'm trying to show you here, but if this is like a normal, how can I give you an example? My finger now is the zipper coil. Standard coil,
Okay.
yarn on top. For racket coil, it's kind of shaped a bit like this, yeah, and the yarn is down below the highest point of the nylon plastic coil. So it means that if it gets hit on top of the zipper, the yarn is better protected. Yeah, because once you break that yarn off the top of the coil can come off the zipper tape, right? So RC zippers, racket coil zippers, are just a different design of the nylon coil. The coils are parts that go together. So they just have a high point that protects the yarn from getting knocked.
That's interesting. So back to the seams, though, right? Because like you said, the actual polyurethane, right? Isn't that what PU is? That coating itself, water's just going to glide right off it, right? But it's really the seams where those stitches go through, right? That's the part of the bag that's actually compromised in terms of water potentially going through. What is it about the other
and
YKK
also
zippers that you mentioned?
The gap in between.
And yes, that little seam right in the middle, yeah.
Yeah,
But what is it
it's
about
difficult.
the other YKK?
Sorry.
What is it about the other YKK zippers that you mentioned that were like $50 a meter or whatever that doesn't have this weakness?
So I don't have any in the office here, but they have a completely different design coil that when it's zipped up, it doesn't have the thread over it. It's all sort of molded onto the tape, yeah? And that is a watertight seal. And then at each end, yeah, it's also designed to lock the system so water can't come in. So when the zipper's done up completely, it closes the zipper. And now that means that if we need to use a zipper, say that's 32.5 centimeters long, we actually have to order it exactly that length. And then, of course, you're not going to stitch that, right? You're going to do, RF welding or high-frequency welding or whatever to make it a truly waterproof bag. And like I mentioned before, check out Subtech Sports.
I'm checking out right now.
Yeah.
TECH?
Yes. Subtech Sports.
Never heard of this brand. So they are a Swedish brand, you said?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, pretty sure. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
And
I've spoken to the guys before.
All right, Swedish brand, final answer. And they're just known for making super awesome, highly technical waterproof gear?
Yeah, but submersible waterproof. That's what waterproof is. Yeah. So, people asking about waterproof bags all the time, and okay, like in reality, most people don't walk around in the rain for that long, right? Most of the time when I see it rain, everybody's ducking for cover, whatever. even with outdoor bags, most people put a rain cover over their bag. Yeah. So me, I when I'm hiking, I would wrap stuff in a dry bag. You know, all the things that need to be waterproof, I wrap them in dry bags individually. But yeah, so it just comes down to like, you know, protecting the bag for just when you get stuck in the rain for a short amount of time, right? So
yeah, it's like an insurance policy. You never need it until you need it, and I think that's what people are interested in. I get a lot of comments from commuters. It's most people who are walking in larger cities, right? And they just a lot of times it's like in Malaysia. Like I get a lot of people from Malaysia because it just rains all the time there, so they're walking around. They just never know when that monsoon's going to hit, and they get absolutely drenched. They just want to make sure their laptop's not going to get destroyed. So I do see where they're coming from. You're right. People aren't like frolicking in the rain on a daily basis, but it can happen sometimes. So
yeah, so having a PU coated zipper over your laptop or something is gonna, you know, but still, if I'm carrying a backpack and it starts, you know, pissing down rain, I've got a PU coated zipper over my laptop. Like I'm still thinking like, damn, when's that water getting in that seam? I don't want it running down and like just hitting the wrong piece of electronics or something, you know. So yeah, stay out of the rain.
or get a rain cover. I mean,
yeah, but that's a pain in the ass too sometimes, you know. Like, and you know, you never have them in the bag when you need it, you know. And if they're connected to the bag, then it's a big lump in the bottom of the bag all the time, and you know. So, but yeah. So the answer to the question is, you know, the more seams that are on top of the bag, the more likely water is going to come in sooner. Yeah. So for example, a crumpler messenger bag, like because messenger bags used to be the big thing, you know, 15, 20 years ago. Like, you know, they big gaping holes in the side underneath the cover, right? But the thing is, it was one piece of material over the whole product. Yeah. So if it rained, like, until the water, and if the bag was older, because people had crumpler bags, you know, they were carrying the same bag for 5, 10 years. As the material's older and the DWR's not there anymore, and the water starts, you know, penetrating into the yarn, and the PU coated stuff on the inside's like not that good anymore. You know, it takes a little while for the water to get in, but it gets in. But basically, having that one sheet of fabric over the top of the bag is probably the best way to, you know, for
it's actually pretty effective, right? I mean, there's no seams, so it's not going to be seeping through. Obviously, at some point, it will pass, but
unless that fabric is older and, you know, then.
Well, on that note, because we got some other questions about like waterproof fabrics and stuff and the aging of it. So, someone wanted to know, what does this take on new materials? Do you like synthetics or do you prefer, you know, natural fibers? Because you've seen probably so many new trends and fabrics coming in. So what's your kind of take on, you know, the situation with the fabrics in the bag world right now?
Well, I would love to be making some backpacks from hemp. I've been wanting to do this since the 90s, you know. It's
why aren't more bags made with hemp then?
It's got something to do with, they call it retting of the fibers. So preparing the fibers ready for spinning yarns is very difficult. And it has properties that are closer to cottons, for example, than it does to nylons and polyesters. So putting coatings on them like polyurethane and things like this is more difficult. So it just tends to not be a good material for bags. You know, it's getting closer and closer.
But you still want to work with them.
Yeah, I'm waiting for people to solve these problems. I've been working with people who actually make machinery on the farms for the farms to do this stuff, to work out, you know, trying to get ahead of the game. But it's a tough gig. Cotton canvas, like there's canvas is not canvas, right? There's different types of canvas, sort of what we call sort of military grade canvas, or stuff that they use for awnings and things like this. There is like coarse spun canvas where it's a very sort of tight weave, smooth material. And in Australia for a long, long time, in fact, One Planet in Australia, still made in Australia, is still making like heavy duty canvas backpacks. They last forever. they're waterproof because as the water does penetrate the cotton swells up and locks the water out basically. But then you're carrying all the weight of the water in the fabric. But for years, I've made these like heavy duty canvas packs in Australia, back in the days.
Was that Crumpler's primary material? Were they mostly a canvas brand or polyesters?
No, Crumpler was polyester.
Okay.
600D polyesters. Mountain Designs though did back in the days, and MacPack, and all these kind of brands. Like One Planet still sort of is holding on to that heritage Australian made, but heavy. It's heavy, So yeah, then there's you asking about other materials like nylons, polyesters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
just riff. Yeah. What are you seeing out there? What are you liking? What are you not a fan of?
Well, it's not about what I like, it's what's right for the product, right? So there's all sorts of crazy materials around these days, from, normal Oxford weave, polyester, recycled and virgin yarn and all sorts of things, different densities to like Dyneema, which is like a ultra high molecular weight polyethylene material, like super light, strong, probably difficult to work with in production. The X-Packs and challenge cloths are also kind of interesting. I look down here because I have one here that's made of X-Pack, So I'm just looking at the bag and just, it just holds a nice structure, but some people don't like the crispness of the material. I love it a lot.
Well, that's actually
but it doesn't suit
one of
every
the next
design.
Questions. No, of course not. I mean, so actually, before I jump into the next question, then, so what is it like? What guides your decision to pick a material? I mean, obviously, if the brand that you're working with is like, hey, we're doing ballistic nylon 1680D corridor for this one, no questions. Then you do it, right? But what would guide your decision to choose a particular fabric if you had the freedom to for the bag that you're making? What are some things that inspire that?
Again, it's going to be different for each project, right? And it doesn't just come down to design too, it comes down to cost. Because like in the end, if people are starting a project and they really understand the market they're entering, they understand the price point in which that market is willing to buy a product for. Yeah? Now, there is some luck there that you might hit some targets that you didn't know were out there, or other people didn't know were out there. It happens a lot. But pricing obviously is going to be a massive factor. And therefore, X-Pack is super expensive. It's 10 times the price of a low-cost
I'm curious, why is X-Pack so expensive?
It's the whole process, how it's made. Like everything, the yarns are higher quality, the densities of lamination, multi-layers, the testing, there's so many things that make the material more expensive made in USA. It's a good material in the end if it's used correctly, right? It's great. But if somebody's trying to sell a bag for a backpack that can hold a computer or something for $50 or $100, then it's just out of the question, right? Because the material's probably going to cost you that much. Maybe not, but you know what I mean. So then it comes down to there's also the market, right? So maybe some outdoor backpacks, people expect it to be nylon. Now, maybe polyester is going to perform just as well for some reason in that area, but if the market wants it, then people are going to look for a nylon, right? A product like yours, for example, now we're kind of open, right? So you're going to have a look through a lot of different kind of material books like we've got back here, and you're going to feel this and go, hey, what is this, And I might be like, oh, that's like 100 denier, and I can't use that on the outside of the bag, So have you got something that looks a little bit like this in a, heavier fabric? Not always easy because the yarn is different size. But, until we find something that you like and that kind of meets the purpose. So there's no single quick answer I can give to the project, mate. It depends on the project, depends on the price point, depends on the market, and depends on what you like.
A lot of factors, yes.
Yeah.
I know this firsthand. We dealt with this when trying to pick the Firo fabric. I was like, there's so many options, and they're all so cool. But that's one of the hard parts about doing this is you can't sample with every material. You just got to kind of pick a few and see which one takes, and then kind of run with it. So that process is very interesting. And you're right, there's all these different things to take into consideration. It's the weather resistance, the price point, the aesthetic, all these different things. But it also does help too when you start considering all these different things, because it helps you kind of hone in on where you end up picking, which fabric you end up going with.
Yeah, of course, if I'm developing an outdoor backpack that's supposed to be sort of light and it's not going to take a lot of abrasion, then I'm going to use a very different material than if it's an outdoor product that's in the mountains carrying skis and stuff like that and being hit on rocks and things,
Well, on that note, because we did get a question, somebody wanted to know, what is the minimum denier that you would recommend for a travel backpack?
For a travel backpack?
Travel backpack, yes. It's urban travel, and they said average use, so they're not on the road 365 days a year, probably traveling 3-4 times a year. What do you think
Are they checking it in? Are they carrying it on?
These are good things to talk about.
Yeah, again, it's understanding your market and the product and how much they're going to use the travel bag I like carrying at the moment is made of a VX 21 X-Pack, and actually that's a 210 denier material. Now, I wouldn't recommend
Really?
it 200. Yeah, it's just that it's all laminated and everything, which gives it extra strength, right? It's laminated with other materials, so it gives it more strength. So, but it makes the surface, the texture a lot smaller and cleaner. And but I wouldn't recommend using just a normal 210D polyester material on a travel bag, right? Like if I had to say where you'd be looking for a bag like that, you've got to be looking around the 600D mark. You can drop it down to 400, 420. But again, depending on the design, there might be some designs on that bag that have higher wear. So then you might, if you're using a lower denier like a 420, you might stick a 600 on the bottom, or you might go 600 and 1,000 on the bottom, or something like that. But again, there's so many different ways to tackle this problem, and there's no single right answer. You have to understand the details of the materials. And the other thing is too, like a 600D material can be like woven like this, right? So there's all it's not very tight, yeah. And 600D can also be woven very, very densely, So a common cheap 600 denier material might be 68T, 68 threads, might be and when you put it under a microscope, you can kind of see the coating behind the yarn, And then there'll be 600Ds that are 86T, a lot more tighter, so they're much higher quality, even using the same kind of yarn. So you really need to know a lot more about fabrics. It's not just about the denier, because the denier is just the single piece of yarn and how much that weighs over, I think, 9,000 yards, if I've got it correctly, So, so I could hold up a piece of string, like this. My computer's on a sewing machine right now, like this, and maybe that's like a 210D. That's 210D. There you go. So that can be woven up in so many different ways. And
so interesting, because I'm like, give me a straight answer, Luke, but it's just it's so much more complicated than that, right? No, I've learned that, but that's, I think, what's been so interesting working with you. Why I wanted to get in the pod so much, because there's so much context, and it's not just these black and white answers for everything when it comes to really engineering any product, but especially for what we're focusing with the bag industry. There's so many factors, and it's not just the denier, but the quality and the supplier, and all these different things to be taken into consideration. So
there's a lot of 300 denier materials that I really like these days, and I would use them on my own bags, no problem at all.
Well, speaking of your own bags, one of the next questions that we had was, we actually got a lot of these like variations of this question, and people wanted to know like, what bag do you use? As the man who's made God knows how many bags, what bag are you using?
So, me, we've had this discussion many times, right? I'm not a bag nerd like you are.
I think you're a bag nerd, just in a different way. We're different kind of bag nerds. Yeah. You're a bag nerd who's talking about like weaves and deniers and all this shit. I'm a bag nerd as to where I like good, cool urban bags. But yes, we're a bit different.
I've made some very technical product, right, with heavy haulage hiking systems and all sorts of things. For general use, I like really simple product actually. A lot of people who start working with this are like, wow, what kind of bag do you use? They're expecting me to pull out some kind of like Bentley of the bags, and you know what I mean? And like, yeah,
some freaking unicorn that you like sewed yourself like in the darkness of your studio.
Yeah. Actually, the bag I'm using right now is this one. Yeah. Made for a German brand called Vidi, V-I-D-I. And for me, I love this product. Really simple. I like being able to open a bag straight in there, laptop stuff,
You're a top loader guy.
Your community would be so disappointed in me, Yeah, like, if zippers breaks, nothing's falling out, right? It's great. Yeah, easy access, nice and comfortable. It's
I've learned that bag well because to bring it back to your first statement about how you got started in motocross, you said, or
no, it was car racing, like NASCAR.
Car racing, yeah. Well, on that note, when I come to Vietnam, you're like, hey, just follow me, mate. We're on our bikes, and then I can confirm you're a bit of a you got a little speed demon in you, Luke. So you're shooting ahead, and I'm just like, where's that backpack? I always got to like find the backpack. So I've grown to know that backpack quite well.
Yeah, no, and I like to wear things until I find weak spots in them too, right? Because I was speaking with, I was at that biggest backpack producer, PK, just some weeks ago, and I was there with a customer, and I was talking with the manager there of the outdoor team. He's very well known in this industry, Jamin Kim. And we were talking about a certain problem with a certain material or something, and I've seen it a lot, yeah, but he doesn't see it because he's working with a lot of brands, and they're, probably he's got a different bag every time I see him, so they don't really see the problems, right? When I get a bag, I tend to wear it for a long time, usually for years, and then
really get to know it.
Yeah, well, if it's working, then I just use it, right? Now, if I'm traveling, I'm not going to use this one, so I use this one right here. Mm-hmm. Which I'm
shout out to Minimal. They're going live soon. We'll be doing a Minimal backpack review quite soon. I'm very excited for this bag to hit the market.
Only 2 of these exist at the moment in the white X pack, but I just sort of did that for me, And
I think 3. I think I have one.
Oh, do you?
Was there 3? The X pack version?
Ah, yeah, we did too.
Maybe. Yeah, you sent me the X pack. I got one too.
Yeah, but I really like this bag actually for that kind of thing. Yeah. So, but again, it's reasonably simple. Carries all the tech gear really nicely.
Just for some context for the listeners, this is for a new brand that's about to launch called Minimal, run by a guy named Sung, who Luke and I have gotten really close with. Luke does their production, so I've gotten actually an early look at this bag as well and got to see some of the developments. So they're launching in the next few weeks, and we got a review lined up. So shout out to Sung and Minimal. Really excited to see this brand hit the market.
Yeah, I hope it does really well for him. It's nice product. Actually, we'll be doing. So but again, it's nice, simple features that are well thought out. I'm not into, and I want something that's not so heavy. It's like so many people are creating bags, and they want everything on there, right? Because they see all these things in the bag market, and they go, oh, you know what? I'm going to be the first person to have everything on the bag. But then they realize that you can't bring a bag like that to the market too easily because the price will probably be too high. Nobody wants to pay it, and the bag's probably going to be super heavy. So I don't like heavy bags.
Sort of how yeah, I mean, and you know, the community would agree, I think. We've talked about this as to where there's been this sort of trend as to where, like, you know, 10 years ago, the Nomadics and the Peak Designs, they were doing these Kickstarters and kind of revolutionizing the carry community in that sense. And just these feature-heavy, modern jetpack backpacks, right? That just had, you know, every bell and whistle you could want. But it came at a cost in terms of the weight. And we were seeing these bags be 4.5, 5 pounds. And then it was okay, you know, because it was just new and exciting. But over the years, that pendulum has sort of swung back around. And people in the community are much more picky about their weight, which I totally get. I mean, heavy bags, especially if you're wearing it every day. I was talking to the YouTuber, Ron Kwok, and he's like, I don't care about weight. But it's like, I drive in my car, you know, I just throw my backpack in the car. But, you know, when I live in Hong Kong, I'm walking around with it for 2 hours a day. You have your bag on your back as on your motorbike, you know? Like you can drive 3 hours in a day if you got to visit a factory, right? So a lighter pack is a happier back for us.
Well, then I just release the straps a bit and let it sit on the seat, right? Because
that is a good habit too, that's true.
Yeah. No, but I don't want to carry a heavy bag. And coming from outdoors and working with like elite athletes in that area as well, like I would give them product that I thought was already light. They'd return it back to me after use and they'd have stuff cut off all the time, you know. So, you know, and I just realized like, hey, you don't need all that stuff, right? And it's, you know, only what you need.
Hey, there's still a spot for it in the market. There's people still love feature-heavy bags. You know, we're still seeing brands put out bags that I guess that got every bell and whistle. So that's what's so cool about the community
and
now
they selling
in the market.
really, really well. But your question
really
was,
well.
What do I like? I like light.
Yes.
You know, I like simple. And you know, the bags that I wear are not necessarily going to be the biggest sellers, possibly. You know. You know, well, the biggest selling bags are all very simple bags, right? This is a discussion we have with designers quite a lot. You know, they want to do this and want to do that, and da da da. I'm like, okay, if you do that, how many more bags are we going to sell? You're just adding costs onto the bag, and how many more bags are we going to sell? That's always a question, and designers don't like that.
Yeah,
question.
it's always been well, I didn't like that question either because you would always challenge me with that as well. I'd be like, no, Luke, we need this. And he's like, but no, but really, like, how will this one extra feature that is very difficult for us to implement really impact your bottom line? And I thought about it. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're kind of right. So it's as a brand owner, you always want to open yourself up to as many customers as possible by, you know, trying to make everyone happy. But if you try and make everyone happy, sometimes you're never making anyone happy, you know? So I always respected those brands who know who they are, they stick to their guns, they know who their customer base is, and they just serve them relentlessly. And that's where I'm seeing brands that have the most success. You know, you look like a brand like Air or Bellroy. They know who they are, and they know their target audience, and their stuff pisses other people off sometimes, but they don't care because they're strengthening the ties within their own community, and it's working very well for them.
But also, Peak Designs and Nomadic, right? They sell fantastic. People love them. Great. High five to them. Like, I wish I made a brand that sold like that, right? My own brand that sold like that, you know. So if the market want it, that's what they want. But it's not mine, and that's okay. Not for everybody. But yeah, you need to understand your market, who you're selling to, and what they want, what they're willing to pay.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. For me, I like light.
So
not
I had one last thing we're going to chat about. And then I'm going to have to get you on for another podcast, Luke, because there's so many things, there's so many questions I have for you. But let's, I want to talk about sustainability. Because I got some good questions on Reddit and on YouTube about just, you know, sustainability in the bag world. They weren't really specific questions. They just wanted to know, like, you know, what's the landscape like in terms of sustainability? Is there a lot of greenwashing going on? These are actually my questions. Is there a lot of greenwashing going on? Are you seeing any new sustainable practices that you think are effective? I know that you have strong opinions on sustainability, so I'd like to hear, you know, double click into a couple of them.
Somehow I wish you didn't ask that because, you know, my thinking is a lot different to other people's. Just to be clear, I've grown up as somebody who people thought was like a greenie kind of guy, right? In the 90s, I was standing up in front of everybody in a company talking about holes in ozone layer and greenhouse effects and taking out forests and all these, like I'm somebody who's always wanted to reduce,
I would say you're somebody who has a very deep connection to nature as well, and you're very ethical in a lot of ways. Just like, I mean, you're a vegetarian, so obviously there's a lot of those things that really speak to you. But what's interesting is just sort of like, from an actual business perspective, are you seeing more sustainable practices being implemented in the bag world, or is it just, what's the reality?
Let me touch on this vegetarian thing. That doesn't mean sustainability. Yeah. I think actually mixed farming practices are obviously proving to be really fantastic. It's really about taking care of other creatures. Like, we've brought up our own animals and ate them as well. They had a good life, respectful death. That we're healthy. That's one of the big things. Like most of the meat I think people are eating is not healthy meat. So vegetarianism is not the answer to the world's problems.
I was more just talking about, like, you're a man of conviction. You have your beliefs that, and I've always appreciated that, and especially because you get to take me to some of the best vegetarian restaurants in Vietnam, and God,
yeah, it's
delicious.
Great, right? This is great stuff here. Yeah. So, when anybody asks me, is it sustainable? I just say no, it's not. Like what we're doing is not sustainable. Like, it's just simply not, right? So, then you start to talk about being cleaner and being more efficient, but that's how business always works, right? Businesses are always going to find ways to become more efficient, do things more efficiently, offer better product to the market to outperform their competitors. But you go making cars more efficient, it doesn't mean cars become lighter weight and less stuff on them. They just create new industries, like, we're going to make the seats nicer, and we're going to put electronics in it, and we're going to do this now, and we're going to do, it just creates a whole other industries that now you've got problems with, right? So I had a guy working with me one time in the factory, and he's like, isn't it awesome what we do? And I'm like, mate, have a think about what you're saying. In the end, we're creating rubbish. Like, all this stuff's going to end up in landfill in the future, right? So for me, it's more about reducing. Anybody who's interested in this subject, I really recommend you read Yvon Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing. When I read this, it was kind of
just for context for any listeners, it's the founder of Patagonia. It's his very acclaimed memoir, which I started to read, and I don't know why I didn't finish it. It was very good. I got about halfway through. I got to finish that one. But what about the book really do you think is important?
It kind of, I realized that somebody else was thinking the way I was thinking. I thought, I was being challenged as somebody who was thinking this way alone. Just create better quality products that last longer. I was looking at recycling and studying this, early this century, and realizing it takes a hell of a lot of energy. Yeah, great, we clean up rivers, and great, we get that stuff out of the environment. Let's do it. Do you know what I mean? But it's, when you start doing that, you create an industry. Now, I am going to say something that maybe finally I'm going to be in trouble for now, but there's and a lot of the brands who are using some of these materials don't know it, right? But I can tell you that in China, where a lot of materials are being made from recycled bottles, they're making bottles and sending them to the reprocessing plant.
Really?
Yeah. Not all, right? There is certified ocean reclaimed stuff. Okay, I'm stepping into dangerous territory here, but the fact is, it's happening.
I mean,
it is. There's a lot of greenwashing.
And that's the word I was about to sort of pivot into, is to where it's not that there's not brands that are trying to do the right thing. It's just that I think a lot of consumers just want to know what to keep an eye out for. And it's interesting. I didn't know that. Like, I knew that there was probably some, there's obviously people are cutting corners where they can, and there's shady companies, and companies are doing the right thing and then the wrong thing. But I didn't know that, that some companies in China would make plastic bottles just to make the fabric out of, so they could say it's recycled.
So there's a lot of this stuff that's going on, and it's really difficult to navigate it. If you're in it and you see it very, very closely, it's very difficult to navigate it and work out what the right thing to do is. I think this wasn't an issue when Yvon Chouinard wrote that book, but he basically started the organic cotton industry off, by going out and saying, I'm going to show everybody why we should be trying to use cotton and natural fibers rather than polyester and nylon. And as he got further and further into the supply chain, he's like, damn, it's actually a really terrible industry, the cotton industry. And he exposed them for the chemicals and the water and the environmental degradation and and that actually in many cases it's better to pull virgin material out of the ground in crude oil and make synthetic fibers. The problem is if you make a product that's only going to last 2 months, then then the problem's bigger. So he basically, it's a long time since I read that book, but I'm pretty sure it was there that I read this, that he was talking about the idea that probably the best way to do it is just make products that last as long as you possibly can, and that hopefully they can be repaired, and that maybe some of it can be recycled later. But recycling nylon it's a tough gig. There's a lot of recycled nylon going on now. Most of it's being made in Korea. A lot of that comes from reclaimed fishing nets. Now, the good side of that is a fishing net is less likely to end up on the bottom of the ocean now. Great. All for it. Problem is, though, that now there's a market for old fishing nets, and therefore they get changed over a lot more frequently, right? So more fishing nets are being made. So there's more nylon being made. So, yeah, it's a really tough one. I really like Patagonia's approach, consume less. I guess that's why I like simple product. I like wearing them for a long time, because I want to see, I don't want to be changing my products all of the time, So it's a little bit anti-marketing in a way, but you asked me the question, and now I'm probably going to get a couple of hey, dude, you shouldn't be saying that stuff on a podcast.
I don't think so. I think actually what you said is really refreshing, and what I'm starting to see more and more is to where it's like you said, it's so complicated to really understand all the things. All right, so you're like, oh, cool. Well, it's cotton. That's a natural fiber or fabric, whatever the hell it is.
Well, heroin is natural, really, right? It's not good for you.
There you go. Exactly. So
arsenic is pretty natural, I believe.
When you do these things at scale too, if you just have your own cotton plant, you make a backpack out of it, sure, it's fine. But at a large billion-dollar scale, then there's always adverse side effects, right? And every single one of these fabrics, I read the arguments, well, don't do nylon for this reason, don't do polyester for that, and it's borderline impossible to navigate. And the truth is, like the founder of Patagonia said, and like what you're saying now, really it's just about, if we're going to consume and make these products, and people are going to buy them, it's about making them last as long as possible, because it's going to end up in a landfill at some point. So the best that we can do is probably just to make just to lengthen that as long as possible.
Lengthen the
higher
life
quality
cycle.
products is probably the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
so I would say what you said is not very controversial, Luke.
Well, the idea that if you want fabric made of recycled bottles, we can do that. No problem, Now, a company like YKK, for example, no, this seems to be sponsored by YKK, but it's not. I just for making samples here, it's not. It's but they are a very serious company who take things seriously, right? So, for example, we use all of this tape, for example, is recycled on the bags we make for Day Owl, yeah, and these orders are sort of coming, ongoing, and YKK is always like, we need forecasts because it's really difficult to get the material. It's really difficult to get the material that we need, yeah. So if we forecast, then we can put in future orders and get first grabs at the material. Now, if they're saying that about this much material, when the roll is 1.5 meters wide, and there's 10,000 meters of it for one production run of a bag, it's a lot more material, and it seems to just appear. Where companies who are serious about it and their certification and delivering the certificates and following their supply chains, they're like, oh, it's tough to get exactly what we need. So and I can tell you that if people have the material, they're happy to sell it to YKK because it's a big company and they're pretty reputable and
they do
paying
things
bills
right
on time, I believe.
Yeah. Let's clarify. YKK not sponsoring this, but also YKK, if you're listening and you want to sponsor, I would be very game. So please reach out to me, Aaron at nomadsnation.com. We can definitely figure something out. But on the sustainability thing too, like I think it's interesting because you recently sent me a video before I had gotten to Vietnam of you at one of our suppliers. I think it was for the lid of the hatch of the Fire T22 backpack, and you were showing me the behind the scenes of how they were making it, and you were mentioning how they're becoming more efficient as to where they would have normally thrown away like the little end pieces that they had to cut off, but now they're actually recycling those. So on the sustainability front, are you seeing more efficiencies with business in terms of like less waste?
Okay, that's a more kind of good approach to take to the question, I think. Yeah, so for example, you're making sheets of the EVA or you're molding buckles, right? You're injection molding. So that plastic has to be injected into the mold before it gets into the cavity where the buckle forms, right? So when the mold gets opened up and spat out, cooled down, they cut off all of that excess plastic. Or same with the EVA, they cut all the edges around the sheet, yeah? Now, in the past, now there is better experts to talk about this than me, but I do know a little bit, In the past, they would put back, like, in any raw batch that they're making new material to injection mold, they could put, say, 10% material, like waste, back into the raw material to reprocess. But as you increase that percentage, it actually starts to weaken the plastic. Yeah, so that's another thing. A lot of recycled materials don't have the same durability to them that the virgin material does as well. But as demand increases, like people are finding ways to be able to put more of that waste back into the system, if not all of it, yeah, without creating a negative effect to the quality of the material that comes out the other end. So in that case, yeah, a lot of suppliers are becoming cleaner in that way, for sure.
That's a win. That's a win for sustainability as far
Absolutely.
as I'm concerned. Like you said, the hard part is you don't want to compromise the quality of a material or of a fabric, but if that can be done in a way that allows you to reuse and throw less shit into a landfill, then that's progress in the right direction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, for sure. Everything that we can do will help, but you just have to realize as you make things more efficient, like these business owners don't just collect the cash and sit on it and go, oh, great, now we're just piling up all of this cash. No, they reinvest it into other things, other businesses and everything, which create more, So the whole, that's one thing that I learned, is that, I had one of my great mates in life was like this big Greenpeace activist who would be on the front line. If Greenpeace briefed them and said, right, with this one you're going to get tortured and then you're going to be thrown in prison and then tortured again, who's up for it? He'd be like, okay, I'm in. Yeah, no shit. Yeah. And when we go into the Greenpeace office, everybody's like, hey, So I've been around this thing, but I didn't have the same idea as him. I appreciated what he did, but I had a different idea about how to approach it, because I think it has to be approached on a business level as well, But yeah, it's the natural cycle. We make things more efficient. That's going to get reinvested into other areas, So sustainable, it's a big word to use. So when people say to me, is it environmentally friendly? I'm just like, no. And they're like, no, but I mean, the recycle isn't, no. Like, you need to be careful with your words here. Sustainable? No, maybe I can take a shit in the garden, but if I take too many shits in the garden, it's not going to be sustainable, right? Like, maybe planting a tree is sustainable. I don't know. Leaving the environment alone to do its thing maybe is sustainable. I don't know. But yeah, so I like to be a bit careful about the words, but we need to make progress in making things cleaner. So we're not pouring shit into the rivers. We're not taking down we shouldn't be touching any old growth forest anymore. We've taken enough of it, we can't deal with more of it gone, We need cleaner oceans, we need cleaner air, all of this kind of stuff, Yeah, but we're not going to do it by, making sustainable product, sustainable cars and backpacks and clothes. It's like...
For sure. Yeah, it's just the reality of consumerism. I mean, there's 7.5 billion people in this world, and they all want cool backpacks and T-shirts and jewelry, and that is going to come at a cost. So I think this conversation is quite refreshing in that sense, as to where it's like, hey, this is just the reality. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, because this backpack used a recycled fabric, it's now an eco-friendly backpack. It's still contributing to waste. It's the reality of the capitalistic infrastructure that we live in. But hopefully, as we get more efficient and technology increases, we can find ways to, reduce harm, increase efficiencies, and, it'll never be sustainable, but hopefully it'll be less bad. That's my closing argument.
Good plug for Patagonia, but, like Yvonne Chenard said, do no unnecessary harm. Like, that's the only way
exactly.
You can... Yeah,
and also Patagonia, shout out if you want to sponsor the podcast, you're invited as well. Listen, Luke, I think I've taken enough of your time. Any closing thoughts or things you want to plug before we run?
No, I think we plugged Minimal, we plugged Vidi, we plugged you.
Plugged YKK.
The Go Father dad bag back here. GoFather.com.au.
We're going to get a review on that one. Go Father, yep, don't you worry.
A few little plugs there. Plug BagMe if you're serious about getting your brand moving along and you want eyes on the ground here in Vietnam.
I can vouch, pretty good team you got there, Luke.
I've got really great people, seriously.
It's the whole team, man. It's a pleasure to work with you guys. And I look forward to probably coming in your office on Monday and pestering you with some fire questions. So I'll probably see you then.
Awesome, dude. I'm looking forward to it somehow. No, that's great, man. Awesome.
If you're still listening to this podcast, thank you so much. Leave me a comment below if you got any questions, and let me know if you want to get Luke brought back on. My brain's already working on different ways for how we can get you in. I want to take a backpack masterclass with you. Like, that's what I think that I want to do. I don't know how we're gonna do it, but I want to do like a different episode. It's like a series. That's what I'm thinking. As you're doing the YKK zipper thing, I'm like, this is brilliant. So I'm gonna try and figure out a way to do that. So. Let's see what we get in the comments below in terms of questions and recommendations for the next episode, and then we'll go from there. Luke, I appreciate your time, bud, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everybody, if you're still here. And see you soon.
Thanks, bud.
Bye.